For more on how the attacks are changing France's budget, I spoke to David Nelson, chief strategist for Belpointe, and I asked him why the tensions between France and also the European Commission.
Look, the attacks in Paris have taken a toll, and there's certainly the human suffering. But I think what you're likely to see over the next days and weeks is, there's going to be a huge rift between France and the European Commission. President Hollande has gone right to the EU and to the EC and told them, look, France is essentially at war. And they believe that this is not just their fight, that this is a fight for all of Europe, really a fight for the world. And to tell you the truth, Phil, I'm surprised Article 5 of NATO hasn't been mentioned already because, under Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. And what he's basically telling them is that you've got to relax the rules. And what I suspect will happen, there'll be some bargaining, some negotiation. But at some point in time, they're going to have to sit down and work this out.
Okay. What does France want? What does France want in terms of money?
Well, I don't think they're looking for direct, certainly euros. I think what they're looking for is you have to first understand the rules of the European Commission. There are two rules, basically, that your debt has to be no more than 60% of GDP. Most of the country, many of the countries, rather, don't abide by that. But the other, and perhaps more important, is that France was on a path to get their budget deficit down to 3% of GDP. They're not there yet. They were likely to make their goal this year. But what they're looking for is a relaxation of that rule because they're going to have to spend a lot more on the military and protecting the homeland. And it's really important for Europe as well because in the end, if your citizens aren't safe, the rest really doesn't matter, does it?
What about the issue of this extra cost of securing the borders? And I don't mean just France. I'm sure every single country's at least thinking about what they would do if they had to have more strict border type controls. That's obviously going to cost money.
It has to cost money, and just look inside Europe. The face of Europe has been changing for really decades. The Muslim population in France right now, it's certainly over 7%. I think Germany's around 6%. That's certainly 9 to 10 million right there, and those numbers are really old. They go back to as far as 2010. Next on the list is the UK, Italy, and Bulgaria. And obviously there's only a very, very small, element that we can call radical, but nevertheless it exists. And the fact that Syrian refugees are coming across the border, and it's been difficult to vet them both there and right here in this country, we're having our own discussion. This is going to cost a lot of money, and the negotiations are going to have to take place at the bargaining table, and they're going to have to work out some things on this budget deficit. But in the end, you have to secure your borders, and you have to make your citizens feel safe because it can change behavior, and that can hurt the economy.
As I look at it, there's two components of Article 5, right? There is the direct military support, airstrikes, for example, or mobilization of a military in the event of an attack or an invasion. But there's also the sort of a bit of a gray area in the sense that if you're spending money to defend yourself, as I think France would be doing at this point, could they initiate Article 5 and request funds or money in the assistance to sort of self-defense? In other words, it could be about money too, couldn't it?
This is a global problem. This is not just a problem for Europe. It's a problem for the United States as well. They're having a discussion, and there's obviously some discourse between the member states there. But even in our own country, right here in the United States, I watched the debates, the Democratic debate. Hillary Clinton said that this is not America's fight. Now, there's a lot of people on the other side of the aisle that would argue with that. I would imagine there are similar discussions taking place between France and Germany. In the end, this is going to cost money, and it's going to cost a lot of it. And whether Article 5 is invoked or not, all of these countries are going to have to come up with it.
One thing that we've kind of avoided talking about is what impact is this going to have on France's economy, not necessarily this year, but in the years to come.
That's a good question. These kind of things, they tend to be one-off events. Even after 9/11 here in the United States, it was a short time before where we actually came back, but then we went into a recession. The question that analysts and economists will have to answer is, do we hit a tipping point? And that tipping point likely happens when people start to change their behavior. When people stop going to, say, the soccer stadium, or they don't want to go to the movies, or maybe they don't go to the mall. Chip by chip by chip, it starts to affect the economy and trickle down, and in the end, it can really hurt. So I don't think we're going to know the answer to that question for quite some time.
Does this change any of the arguments and the tone of the debate of the budget when you're faced with sort of a national security crisis, you think?
It does. Some things, get put to the side for a while, and while that might not be a good thing, in the end, security has to be paramount, because if your citizens aren't safe, the rest of it really doesn't matter. That's got to be first on the list. Take care of that. Take care of the borders. Make sure your people are protected. You don't have to push aside all of your goals and desires, but you have to protect the people first, at least from my vantage point.
Lastly, what do you think the rest of Europe's going to respond with? I know there's this contention over these the funds and the budget in France, but overall, the EU and the EC has to take a stance at some point.
I think there'll be negotiations, and I think in the beginning, many member states will be reluctant to do anything. It'll be the next attack that pushes it over the edge. If we have an attack in Germany, the conversation will change dramatically.